Hello, I'm Jacob Smith, and I'll be presenting the results of my 2020 RCEU project. Of course, 2020 is the year of coronavirus, so instead of being in the lab, I made a simulation of the interactions of quantum dots with metallic nanoparticles done in MATLAB. Before I continue in my presentation, I'd like to thank Dr. Sadeghi for his patient and consistent advice, and all of the listed organizations for funding. The first question on most people's minds when they hear about a topic of research is, why does it matter? So here's my explanation. Quantum dots are used for a lot of applications, and the one that pertains closest to this project is the development of better solar panels, because quantum dots are used to absorb and transfer the energy. Now there are a few key terms and abbreviations that I'd like to explain in a bit more detail before moving on in my presentation. First, quantum dots, or colloidal semiconductor nanocrystals. Breaking it down term by term, this is a colloid, which means it's clumps of a material homogeneously dispersed throughout a solution. Semiconductor is just the name of the type of material, like cadmium selenide, and nanocrystal just means that it has a periodic structure on the atomic level, hence crystal, and has dimensions on the scale of nanometers, so nano. Next, metallic nanoparticles, which are just spheres of a single type of metal. So that could be a sphere of gold. It's also on the scale of nanometers, but it's a little bit larger. Fluorescence lifetime imaging microscopy, FLIM. This is an important term because it's what I'm trying to simulate other than just the interactions of metallic nanoparticles and quantum dots. So this is an imaging technique that uses differences in the exponential decay rates of something that fluoresces like quantum dots or other fluorophores to generate an image, as opposed to normal imaging where intensity and wavelength are the things that make up the image. An exciton is just an excitation of an electron in a quantum dot, which is usually expressed as an electron-hole pair. But this is just a fancy word for excitation. So the quantum dot receives a photon, electron gets excited, now it has the energy in the form of an excitation. A plasmon is the coherent oscillation of the free electrons around the metallic nanoparticle with the light that is exciting it. But there's more on this on the next slide. So this is an expression of a plasmon interacting with a quantum dot. So the metallic nanoparticle is represented in yellow, the quantum dot in green, and the electron cloud around the metallic nanoparticle is represented in this translucent blue circle. And the wave that you can see in blue is the electric field of light passing by. So as this little animation shows, the electrons oscillate coherently with the light as it passes by, generating an electric field around the metallic nanoparticle that adds to the effect of the electric field passing by, which is why it's called plasmonic enhancement. It's the increase in the electric field experienced by the quantum dot due to the presence of the metallic nanoparticle. Another way that metallic nanoparticles interact with quantum dots is through non-radiative transfer of energy between them. The reason that this energy transfer is non-radiative is because the metallic nanoparticle is close enough to the quantum dot that it's smaller than the wavelength of light in these nanophotonic systems. So there are two theories for this: Foster resonant energy transfer, or FRET, and surface energy transfer, or SET. They both treat the quantum dot as a single dipole, which makes sense due to the definition of an exciton as an electron-hole pair. They differ in the way that they treat the metallic nanoparticle. FRET treats it as a singular dipole, which makes sense given the relative motion of the center of the metallic nanoparticle and the electron cloud, the free electrons that are moving away from it. SET treats the metallic nanoparticle is a set of random dipoles over the surface, which gives it a little bit of its actual form. Now to talk about the actual simulation. So I started by just simulating the one metallic nanoparticle, one quantum dot system, and then generalized to a larger system with an entire layer of quantum dots over a silica block with metallic nanoparticles embedded in it. So, of course, one of the key parameters is the center-to-center distance between the metallic nanoparticle and the quantum dot directly above it. Using this, I calculated the distance from each metallic nanoparticle to each quantum dot to determine the relative effects of plasmonic enhancement and fret. Of course, the radius of the metallic nanoparticle is also important because it changes its polarizability and which affects its representation as a dipole and other things about how the plasmon gets excited, and then the emission and absorption wavelengths of the quantum dot, which is just what wavelength it's receiving light at and what wavelength it's emitting light at. I don't have a ton of time to go into the nitty-gritty details of all the calculations for this simulation of the interactions between quantum dots and metallic nanoparticles, but here are some key formulas and references that those formulas came from. So first, there's the complex dielectric constant of the metal, which is made up of the Drude model contribution and the inner band contribution. And that's kind of a basic thing for the calculation of the polarizability, this alpha, the polarizability of the metallic nanoparticle, which this is complex dielectric constant and therefore alpha are both functions of frequency. Other factors are the dielectric constant of the environment and the radius of the metallic nanoparticle. So this alpha, or polarizability, is a core part of the calculations of both the plasmonic enhancement and the fret rate. And there are other factors, including the distance between the particles in both of those formulas, and for the fret rate, the transition energy from the first to the second energy level of the quantum dot. And then there's this first order differential equation for the rate of exciton generation and elimination are included there. But if you have any questions, please email me at jms0100@uah.edu. Now for some results. The first result I'd like to display is the decay rate, which is a very important result because it's the core factor in fluorescence lifetime imaging, because this is the lifetime of the energy in the quantum dot. So the decay rate is just the rate at which energy is consumed from the quantum dot, either converted into photons so the quantum dot is emitting, or transferred to the metallic nanoparticle, or is non-radiatively decaying in some other intrinsic way, like the electron migrating to a surface defect in the quantum dot. So this figure is the decay rate plotted against the location in the array of the quantum dots. As you can see, there are peaks at each of the 5 metallic nanoparticles embedded under this array of quantum dots. So the reason this is because the non-radiative decay mechanism, the transfer to the metallic nanoparticle, and the increase in the probability of radiative decay for the quantum dots due to the presence of the metallic nanoparticles both provide an increase in the decay rate. So the closer the quantum dot is to the metallic nanoparticle, the faster the decay rate of that quantum dot will be. Another key result is the quantum yield, which, though it's not directly observable, represents the interactions of the quantum dot with the metallic nanoparticle well. And it's also indirectly observable in the effect it has on the total emission of different regions of the sample. So the quantum yield is just the ratio of emitted photons per absorbed photons. This figure, just like the last one, is the parameter, in this case quantum yield, plotted against location on the array. So interestingly enough, at the location of each of the metallic nanoparticles, there's actually a minimum for the quantum yield, and a short different distance away from them, there's a circle of maximums for the quantum yield. The reason this is at the closest point to the quantum dot, or to the metallic nanoparticle, phosphorescent energy transfer, or whatever energy transfer model you're using, dominates. So energy is being transferred to the metallic nanoparticle and not emitting, so the ratio of emitted per absorbed decreases. Whereas at a certain distance away, it's actually the plasmonic enhancement that predominates. So even though some energy is getting transferred to the metallic nanoparticle, the primary effect of the metallic nanoparticle is the increase in the radiative decay probability for the quantum dot. Before I finish my presentation, I'd like to talk a bit about the relationship between my simulation and current experimental techniques. So the current state of fluorescence lifetime imaging, which this is a simulation of, the best resolution setup, which is a stimulated emission depletion setup, only gets about 50 nanometer resolution, which means that the peaks and troughs that I simulated would not be as easily seen in a real experimental setting. Though the simulation is still a valid expression of the interactions between metallic nanoparticles and quantum dots. Larger nanostructures could be viewed, and technology may improve. So those are reasons that this isn't a super major issue. Similarly, I assumed that the sample was evenly illuminated, which is not necessarily going to line up well with every experimental technique. Some of them scan point by point along the sample and then generate an image from each of the decay rates measured that way, but some have a full detector with multiple pixels that are able to take the decay rate separately. So technology could improve there too, though these aren't super massive qualifiers or reasons that this might not line up perfectly with current experimental techniques. I thought it would be important to note how it actually relates to actual experimentation. Overall, I'd say this project was a success. The simulation calculates and displays key values for the system I considered and is consistent with current theory. I'd say it's definitely an appropriate beginning approximation of a fluorescence lifetime imaging experiment, even though there's still work to be done. Part of the reason I couldn't actually include the exciton transfer between quantum dots as a part of my simulation is because I couldn't find anything on the interaction between metallic nanoparticles and the transfer between excitons on multiple quantum dots. I'd like to end by saying that I'm really thankful for getting to do this project, and I learned a lot about the way that these nanophotonic systems work. And honestly, I'd say that even though I didn't get to be in the lab due to coronavirus, I learned a lot, maybe even more than I would have in the lab, by trying to actually simulate just based off of current research, this sort of system. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope that you learned something interesting and have a really great rest of your day. If you have any questions, please email me at jms0100@uah.edu. Have a good day.